Recording.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. That tells me. So the agenda, as I said before, first up will be our speaker for tonight, Gilad Bino. Then after the presentation and associated Q&A, we'll move on to general business. Fairly simple and straightforward. For the Zoomers out there, first of all, a reminder to please mute your microphones, except for Gilad, if not already done, so we can't hear any background noise from your place. During the presentation, I ask you all to keep your microphones muted. For the Q&A session, you can ask questions by virtually raising your hand in the reactions box or utilising the chat function to send a message to the off host that you want to ask a question so it can be read out, or type your question into the message box and we can read it out for you. So please mute your microphones after asking your question. For those here in the audience, what I'll need you to do is raise your hand and you'll have to come up here to this speaker's box so that you can be heard through the microphones and out there in Zoom land, and so our speaker can hear your question as well. With that, I'll introduce our speaker. Gilad Bino is a senior lecturer at the University of New South Wales, specialising in freshwater ecology, landscape ecology, conservation and biodiversity, and wildlife and habitat management. He leads the Platypus Conservation Initiative and contributes to the global standard for wetland conservation. He has been instrumental in reintroducing platypuses to Sydney's Royal National Park, aiming to re-establish a stable and diverse population. Gilad will delve into the fascinating world of the platypus, an Australian icon with a distinctive morphology and evolutionary history. However, this unique animal faces significant threats due to extensive human land use in its natural habitats. This discussion will highlight the pressing need to establish effective conservation strategies. With that brief introduction, I'll hand over to you, Gilad. Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. So everyone can hear me. The sound is working well. No delay or...
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. All right. Thanks again. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. I guess I started working on this wonderful creature, the platypus, almost 10 years ago, almost haphazardly, through a successful research grant collaboration with Taronga Zoo. And it's definitely been snowballing since. One aspect which I didn't take into account is how charismatic and iconic the platypus is, and how significant would be my community engagement and interaction with Australians across wherever the platypuses occur. So that's something that has become quite a significant proportion of, I guess, my time and appreciating the impact that it has had over the years. I do feel and I do see a gradual shift in our in the collective dialogue that we have about the condition of platypuses generally. Yeah, you can see me on the screen, but just in case, that's a pretty photo of myself, kind of in action. But also a lot of credit I need to give to Dr. Tennille Hawk. She started off as a PhD student of ours and now is a research fellow with the Platypus Conservation Initiative. And together, we've been studying platypuses for many years. And yeah, so a lot of credit goes to her for as well. My work is very much heavily focused on research and understanding platypuses. And for that, there's a lot of hard work that is put into the process. There are no shortcuts with platypuses. I would say it's a very challenging and very difficult species or animal to understand. It's obviously active mostly at night in the water. It's very cryptic, very shy, and so really the only way for us to really understand platypuses and the way we're impacting platypuses is through trapping of these animals. And so a lot of the work, or predominantly most of our work, involves going out and setting nets. We've got different types of nets for different rivers. If we're working in deep water holes, we've got a tinny with us, which sometimes we have to haul overland. At one extreme, we were carrying a tinny with all our equipment over 2 kilometers to get to some distant water hole on Kangaroo Island. But in most cases, yeah, we're setting up our gear there by the river and waiting for platypuses to wake up and hopefully get caught in our nets. The work that I do is in all the photos that I'm sharing here. All of these platypuses are anesthetized, so that was a real priority for me in terms of welfare for these animals. So I've got a mobile kind of anesthesia setup with me. And I really try and minimize my interactions with the animals. From capture, they go straight into a pillowcase, and from there, they get induced or they get sedated while still in the pillowcase, and then I take them out only when they're already sleeping, and I maintain that anesthesia throughout the process. So really, all these photos are sleeping platypuses. But I also spend a lot of time with, like I would say, broadly education, reaching out to communities, particularly kids. It's just an extraordinary feeling to see that spark in the kids when we talk about platypuses. I have an ongoing project in the Illawarra area where I have a platy camp. This year is going to be the 3rd year that we're running this, and in collaboration with New South Wales Department of Education, where I kind of combine research and education, and I get the kids to join me while I'm actually doing the trapping, and they get to see a platypus up close, and it's just a very unique experience for the kids, and it's really a pleasure to share it. So, but I do go around schools and land care groups and communities, and that's a very big focus of mine. And then also more broadly is really connecting, I guess, with the communities that are out there that are sharing the rivers with platypuses and other freshwater species. And while I'm working, I make it a priority as much as I can to interact with the local landowners, and I invite them to join me while I'm doing the work and get to share this experience and talk a lot about platypuses. And really, you can see this lovely couple on the left. These people have been living on this plot of land for all their lives, and only ever get to see glimpses of platypuses, and so it's a real pleasure to actually show them a platypus up close and really appreciate this wonderful creature. I have to start every talk. I still get it. Every talk is I start with the number one question, which is, what is the correct plural term of platypus? So platypus is derived from a Greek word, which means flatfoot, and hence, because it's Greek, the pluralization of a Greek word would be platypodes. Not, if it was Latin, it would be platypi, but so platypodes. But in English, we've already assimilated the word platypus, so it loses, I guess, the Greek form, and we attach the standard English uses to for plural. So the correct term is platypuses. Our understanding of platypuses generally has definitely been increasing, particularly in terms of like academically. Big focus has been put on platypuses gaining pace, I guess, from the kind of early 1990s, with a big focus on the unique characteristics of and the life history of the platypus. And in more recent years, insights into the genomics and population structure and so forth. But really a big gap that has remained for most of this period was understanding I would say the conservation status or the condition of platypus populations and numbers across their range, and how our anthropogenic related processes are impacting platypuses and the viability of populations across their range. I really recommend, if anybody wants to do a deep dive, prominent platypus researcher Tom Grant wrote the book, The Platypus. But we also have, it's been a few years now, but we have a readily available open access kind of review, just kind of highlights the general understanding of the platypus. So the platypus is obviously quite an extraordinary, unique creature. It's an Australian icon, but it's also an extraordinary animal, evolutionary wise, on a global scale. It's a member of the monitoring family, and so along with the platypus, there are 4 echidna species, and those are the only egg-laying mammals. Platypuses build nests, and so they would carry the nesting material. You've got there a photo of a female platypus carrying its nesting material with its tail. And so platypuses build nests and lay eggs, usually 1 or 2 eggs. And from our understanding, it's females kind of breed every second year or so. The females have mammary glands, so they secrete milk, which they feed their young. And the males have venomous spurs. Interestingly enough, the female, when they hatch from the eggs, they have a very tiny vestigial spur that disappears within the first kind of 6 months, and then only the males retain these spurs. The spurs are really the only way which we can kind of guesstimate the age of a platypus. So females, it's really either juveniles or adults. We can kind of like general body condition, but that's not going to be very informative. But and then males, we can kind of guesstimate based on the spur morphology that does change over the lifespan of the animal, but still we're very much lacking with accurate estimate of the age of an animal when we encounter it in the wild. We're working on developing a genetic clock, and we're hoping to develop something over the next few years. Males carry these spurs for again, a male fighting, so sexual selection. The males, we see increased fighting during the breeding season, in the lead up to the breeding season, scarring and increased venom production over that period. Sorry. And I haven't been spurred, but I'm told that it's one of the worst pains that we can feel. It could be a pain for up to 6 months, depending on the amount of venom that gets injected. And apparently standard like morphine and painkillers don't really inhibit that kind of muscular pain. So I really recommend people don't handle platypuses. And if they do, then in the correct way. Platypuses have these amazing webbing on their front feet, which they use to swim. And when they're walking on land, you can see that video on the left. When they're walking on land, it's more on on the knuckles, rather than, sorry, here. So they walk on the knuckles. And then the movement is more similar to a crocodile than a standard mammal. And they have highly specialized bills, which they use to forage. So they close their eyes while they're foraging, and they have electromechanoreceptors at the tip of their bills, which they forage for macroinvertebrates, the spineless bugs that inhabit healthy waterways. And they kind of sift with that and detect their prey and sift through the leaf litter for feeding. For some weird reason, they have 5 pairs of sex chromosomes. And they don't have any teeth. They have just grinding pads, which they use to mush up their food, and they store bits of it in kind of cheek pouches that we can use to sample and better understand what they're eating. In terms of the life cycle of the platypus, so we see increased interactions, I guess, fighting between males in the lead up to the breeding season. It's kind of that August-September period. Males become, I guess, more territorial. It's not an absolute territory from what we can see, but we see that fighting, and then there's courtship, and it's females will avoid the males until they're ready to copulate, and then once they do, they've got 2 weeks of gestation where they dig their specialized nests. I'll get to that in a sec. And then they'll lay their eggs, 2 weeks of incubation, and from there on, they're rearing their young, which we call endearingly puggles. And females really work very hard at raising their young. They have to increase their food consumption by more than 50% to keep up, and they would towards December when her young are quite large. They would probably spend almost all day either foraging or resting somewhere, and then coming into the nest to feed and maybe rest a bit more for just 1 or 2 hours. I should say that there's quite a large variation in the morphology of platypuses across their range. Males are generally about 50%, I guess, larger or heavier than female platypuses. Males around kind of New South Wales are about 1.5 to 2 kilos. And females are about 1 kilo. About with the tail, males are about 60 centimeters long, but that would change quite a lot, significantly throughout the platypus's range. They're considerably smaller in far north Queensland and considerably bigger down in Tasmania, where the males can reach up to 3 kilos. The juveniles, when they emerge in late January, are about 700 grams. And I was just chatting with someone who saw a large carp gudgeon eat a juvenile platypus. So they're quite vulnerable when they emerge. We really don't know in terms of how long they stay around the natal area and what sort of support they get from their moms after they emerge. We're very much in the dark. We suspect they hang around for probably a year, maybe until the next breeding season, and then maybe males might disperse. And we're just now looking at the genetics in particular area over time, and the dispersal, although we know they can move a dozen kilometers easily, their dispersal range might be just over the horizon in terms of the home range. And so platypuses usually inhabit, I'd say a female is about 1 kilometer, males maybe a bit more of a river stretch. And that kind of is their home turf over most of the year. So platypuses extend across Eastern Australia, all the way from far north Queensland around Cooktown, all the way down to Tasmania. They used to occur into South Australia on the mainland, where they're pretty much extinct. There's an introduced population on Kangaroo Island, and there's a population on King Island as well in Tasmania. And they inhabit as we can expect, inhabit a wide range of habitats and climates. They occur in the alpine regions of the snowy. They're active year-round, and they are also very much active up in far north Queensland. So they're quite adaptable. They have a thermal. They don't sweat, and they have a physiological, although wide, a physiological tolerance of up to it's kind of between 20. Their nominal body temperature is kind of between 28 and I'd say up to 32. But above that, they can't survive. So even for us, I guess if you think about it in terms of humans terms, even half a degree for us is quite challenging, and we feel very ill by just an increase in half a temperature. But for platypuses, they can tolerate quite a significant variation in that. For about, like I'd say, maybe 2-3 degrees is quite normal. But they do have an upper threshold that we fear might be a cause for concern, particularly during dry periods and if temperatures increase. Was something I wanted to mention. Yeah, they don't go into like a winter torpor and they're active year round. They just anecdotally, they're very adaptable to cold climates. They have the second densest fur in the animal world. So like all those interesting aspects of platypuses. When it comes to platypus habitat, I guess we can all envision what constitutes as a healthy habitat. When we think about like clean waters, healthy, vibrant food web, which for platypuses, it's the macroinvertebrates, the spineless bugs, all the mayfly, dragonfly, caddisflies, glass shrimps, worms, even mollusks could end up in the diet of platypuses. And to sustain that, yeah, we need like probably like clean waters and a good input of riparian, like organic material. There's a lot of complexity in their leaf litter, fallen logs that are creating kind of that diversity of freshwater habitats. And platypuses are very reliant on earthen stable banks to dig their burrows. I'll get to that in a second. They have nest burrows and they have rest burrows. And for that, they really need a complex root system to hold those burrows stable. And the platypus's, I guess, optimal habitat is about, half a meter to about 3, 4, 5 meters in depth. And they're really those deep water holes are the prime habitat, foraging habitat for platypuses. But, saying all that, we can kind of like, again, describe what an ideal habitat is, but to develop a quantifiable metric around each one of those that will allow me to determine what's the carrying capacity of platypuses in a particular area is still lacking. In some areas where we've been, we were thinking that this could be like a great platypus environment and habitat, but the numbers were really low. And then trying to understand like what's the biomass and those kind of aspects is still quite challenging. Yeah, so we're still very much working, and I'll give you some example on how we're trying to improve our assessment of habitat quality and carrying capacity. But if through a series of educated guesses, if we're trying to estimate the number of platypuses across their range, that's a question I get often. So I went through this process of reviewing existing literature of estimates on density of platypuses per kilometer of river and relating that to the size of the river and overlaying that with climatic variables and other land uses and developing kind of those standard niche models and going through all of those processes. We come up with an estimate that is has quite a wide range, anywhere between 30,000 and 300,000 platypuses across the range. So I don't know if you want to drop somewhere in the middle, you'll probably be somewhere in that range. So it's really hard for us to even estimate that. So here's an example. So we know if you focus on the bottom left, this is a study we did comparing female platypuses during the breeding season and tracking them to their nesting burrows and comparing that to resting burrows. So you can see here that, I don't know if it's too small, but nesting burrows are almost twice as far away from the water's edge as resting burrows. Resting burrows on average might be about 4.5 meters from the edge of the water, or in terms of like the elevation, it's about 1 meter above the water. That's definitely related to the variability in the size of the river, without a doubt. But in comparison, the nesting burrows that we were tracking in the same area were twice as much. So they extended on average 9 meters, some up to 10 meters away, and they were twice as high from the water edge. So they were 2 meters away. And they represent quite a complex system. And the females, like they plug the entrances and they have 20, like they can extend up to 20 odd meters of burrows, tunnels, dead ends, empty chambers, and then one nesting chamber. But in terms of like appreciating what is the minimum, I would say like the riparian zone to sustain platypus breeding, then we're talking about, if the nest is 10 meters, then the riparian zone to sustain and stabilize banks, we're talking at least 15 meters, if not 20 meters. So when we're coming to prioritizing riparian zones for platypuses, we went through this process of tracking female platypuses, mapping burrows, and then using drones to map out using LiDAR, telemetry, mapping the riparian vegetation, and really developing quite accurate maps of where we could be potential platypus, like a suitable habitat for platypus burrows. And really our ambition, the next phase of this is to we've been surveying the depths of the water and the estimating biomass, and we have accurate estimates of the density of platypuses in this area, and so coming up with at least an estimate on terms of relating that to the carrying capacity, and ideally we'd be able to extend this to other regions across the species range. So still very much work in progress to really push our capacity to quantify habitat and quantify platypus suitability and carrying capacity. But of course, we need to consider threats very much. Unfortunately, platypuses, like many other species, are impacted by a whole suite of threats, and they're all interacting and compounding each other. Start with the easier ones in terms of land use change and land clearing. So destruction of riparian vegetation causes this erosion of the banks and destroys habitat. That erosion fills up our rivers, our waterways, and destroys habitat for foraging. But this process also occurs at the catchment scale. So the practices that we employ in terms of farming and pasture and how we're losing our topsoil as a result of intensive farming practices that increases that erosion, ends up in the waterways, and also pollution in terms of application of pesticides and herbicides have had a big impact also on the food web. And all of those, the erosion and destruction of the riparian zone, creates fragments populations, creates patches of good and bad habitat, the building of dams and culverts and roads and all of that, also fragment population, introduction of invasive species. And just to give you, a cascading process, we know that platypuses and other freshwater species are very much dependent on a capacity to move along waterways, particularly during dry periods, where they have to find freshwater refugias. And so in an area where waterways are continuously receive a sediment and become shallower, so they're more prone to drying. And then if the river is fragmented, then populations or animals don't have any capacity to move along the waterways, and we do see increased predation by invasive species during those dry periods, and all of those have led to significant declines and local extinctions of platypus populations. Pollution is also a big problem. Hair ties, discarded fishing lines. I'm happy to say that those opera house nets are slowly being phased out. Unfortunately, there's still a lot out there. I still regularly recover these from the water, and those traps, as long as they're in the water, are continuous death traps to platypuses. and we've recorded over a dozen skeletons in one trap. So as long as they're in the water, they continuously kill platypuses. So I guess, in terms of the conservation status of platypuses, they're not listed federally under the EPBC Act. They're listed as endangered in South Australia, where they're pretty much wiped from the mainland, apart from a closed population in a reserve, and there's an introduced population on Kangaroo Island that's still holding on. In Victoria, they were listed in 2021 as a vulnerable species, entry level to the threatened. IUCN, they're listed as near threatened. And I tried to get okay, so maybe 1 second, I'll get to this. So in 2021, we did a national assessment trying to get the platypus listed as a threatened species, and submitted our assessment to the Threatened Species Scientific Committee. We did think that the evidence suggests that there are significant declines. For some reason, you can't see the numbers here. So you can't see, sorry. I'll keep going. So these are our estimates in terms of rates of decline. Obviously, with those listing metrics, you have to hit those thresholds in like within 30 years or like 3 generations, which is approximately 7 years for platypuses. But we've seen that the significant declines have happened in the Murray-Darling Basin. And in Queensland, we've got serious knowledge gaps in terms of the distribution of platypuses there. And a lot of the work that we did in terms of our assessment was very much reliant on opportunistic observations or anecdotal observations to quantify rates of decline in terms of relating that to the recency of observation as a surrogate for decline. If a platypus hasn't been seen in an area in over 30, 40 years, then maybe that's an indication that they're no longer present there. But the Threatened Species Scientific Committee felt that there was not enough justification for listing just because of that uncertainty, even though we did some models that would support the notion that we're going to experience more decline and more local extinction. And we're bringing some cases of like the impacts of urban environments as well. So we're a bit now still in like this endless loop where platypuses are not listed. There's no national or state level monitoring of platypuses, and so no one's any development and or any action on the waterways. They don't really need to be considering platypuses, and so we're still very much in the dark, and we'll stay in the dark unless we do something. And so as an attempt to address this issue, maybe just before that here, I'll give you some examples of like, this is something that we did just to show you, I guess, this like example of without proper baseline data, those concepts of shifting baseline and this collective loss of memory about what were the conditions, even just this is 100 years ago. We were scouring the digitized newspapers 100 years ago and collecting any anecdotal information about platypuses and numbers. And without a doubt, we were coming across numbers that were far greater than what we commonly see today. There's one account from 1859 of someone seeing over 100 platypuses making their way downstream. There are discussions of processes as well, like response to drought, seeing a migration of platypuses, first the males, and then after the breeding season, the female and the juveniles were following suit. And really in our assessment, we were trying to make the case of this shifting baseline and the significant decline and loss of platypuses. And so in response to lack of knowledge, I developed the Platy project. It's in collaboration with Australian Conservation Foundation. And so this is kind of a web app that I'm managing where this is in live sync with the Atlas of Living Australia. And what it does is you're all welcome to just go on that website. What it does is it shows the recency of observations at a standard 10 by 10 or 25 by 25 grid scale. and it does show you the gaps in knowledge, all those gray areas with no records, and then you can start seeing those red areas and orange and yellow areas where platypuses haven't been recorded for several decades. And I'm happy to say that participation is really high. We've already eclipsed the standard kind of pipeline of or flow of information, and it's really helping us. And through the Platy project, I also encourage people to record not only the ones, but also the absences or the attempts of records, but also importantly, all those like I guess past recollections of yeah, I remember my grandfather, or I remember as a kid, I was there on a camp and I saw a platypus. So that kind of information is really important for us to try and quantify the changes that have occurred in the distribution of platypuses. This is a current estimate in terms of declines of platypuses. It really depends, I guess, at what scale you're operating at a 25 or 10 by 10 kilometer scale. And these are kind of the declines, or what proportion of occurrences or number of grids fall into each one of those categories, with like significant gaps also in our understanding. So purely just knowing where platypuses occur nowadays is still something we don't know. I don't think we can say that for many species, Australian species. And if you wanted to like quantify, like it's easy. I've done the calculation what it would take to once and for all know where platypuses occur. With like it wouldn't be a big contribution by each one of the states. It's within probably a year, and between $1 and $2 million, we can really just finish this once and for all and get a good understanding of where platypuses occur, and get a good understanding and assessment of its conservation status. So yeah, we're employing environmental DNA, which it's quite a good and sensitive technique to just detect presence absence of platypuses. But we're also very much focused on when we do that to employ a multi-species approach. So not only platypuses, and adding value to other threatened species and understanding generally the freshwater a community composition and food web and so forth. So this is a map of some recent eDNA surveys that collectively we've been putting together, and I'm trying to consolidate that and also offer a platform where this kind of information can be integrated. And just a graph of like I guess concurrence between eDNA results and those observations, that like anecdotal observations, and just to I guess put confidence in this approach of anecdotal information can definitely provide a surrogate for declines. So this is like an exercise I did in terms of trying to quantify the viability of populations of platypuses across their range, looking at the impact we've been having on the habitat and the impact of fragmentation under natural and potential under future climate projections, in terms of like the impacts of droughts. And unfortunately, the models, that obviously the more extreme assumptions you put on the model, the more local like extinctions we're seeing of platypuses. But this is really this exercise that I've done a few years ago. And I was saddened to get some to confirm this through some of our recent surveys that we've done in the Northern Murray-Darling Basin, where we're applying eDNA surveys. And I'll just focus, if you notice on the right-hand side, the map, there's the top left and the bottom right. These are two areas where we're surveying eDNAs, and blue is detection. Green is also detection, or is kind of semi, and reds are no detection. And we're surveying above and below large dams. So the top left is Pike Creek in Queensland that flows into the Merrick, and the bottom right is the Peel River that flows through Chaffey Dam down to Tamworth. And the other two rivers are the Severn and the Gwydir. And what we saw was that we weren't getting any detections of platypuses on the Queensland one and on the Peel River. And in Queensland, I would say here, so that's the quote. Sorry, I need to move around. In Queensland, on that Pike Creek in Burrell in 1927 was detailing someone's account that platypuses were found in nearly every waterhole, whereas today we're not detecting any platypuses there. And on the Peel River, the last detection is on 2008. And so those two examples could be scenarios of local extinctions due to fragmentation and loss of resilience of platypuses to respond to drying conditions without any capacity for recolonization. Really, I guess that moves me into the last steps of like this talk is in a sense are now we're really in that space where in a mosaic of a patchwork, I guess, of habitats that are fragmented because of different reasons. We are now moving more into the space of, I guess, facilitating what we call metapopulation processes or facilitating movements and connectivity, movements of animals and connectivity between populations in response to particularly to droughts in 2019. It was very horrible. Like we were definitely receiving a lot of information was coming in about the impact of drying rivers and loss of habitat of platypuses. We did rescue at the time several platypuses and took them to Taronga Zoo for temporary housing and then returned them. And now Taronga has built in the Western Plains Zoo a large facility that can house up to 65 platypuses. So we're very much prepared. When the next drought happens, we'll be able to respond. So we're developing these kind of intervention frameworks of how we respond and in what way and when to potential catastrophic conditions that we might need to intervene. So and so that's the rescue and the translocation, and then the other aspect is really the reintroduction of animals, particularly in areas where we're restoring habitats. And so that, I guess, brings me into the case study of the Royal National Park, where we've reintroduced 10 animals last year to the Royal National Park and in collaboration with WWF and Taronga and New South Wales Parks and Wildlife, and really trying to maximize the amount of information that we can generate out of this reintroduction and hopefully see a thriving population in the Royal. So we introduced 6 females and 4 males, and we've been tracking them. I'm really happy to say that earlier this year we surveyed there and found a juvenile, so that they were successfully breeding, and so that was really like probably one of my highlights of my career. And genetically, we know who the parents are, and so we've been tracking these animals, and we're gaining a lot of insights into really the establishment phase of platypuses in the park, and we're keeping a close eye on them, and we're hoping to move into, I guess, a second phase where we introduce a few more animals to just make sure that this population is viable moving forward. So still very much a work in progress. We're trying to get the New South Wales government to give us to support the second phase. Unfortunately, we're still stalling, but we're hoping to be able to secure some funds for this. And the last thing is really I want to move into, like I would say, a catchment scale, catchment-based conservation frameworks, when this is really the fundamental scale for conservation work for platypuses or in generally freshwater species, where we really have a good or a catchment perspective on the various processes that are happening within the watershed, within the catchment, in terms of land uses and the threats and different communities and the different stakeholders, the condition of the rivers, and really trying to develop a cohesive way at the catchment scale to bring together really, I think we can't rely on national parks to save our platypuses or other freshwater species. Most of the rivers meander through private property, and it's really up to communities and up to landowners to step up and care for the rivers. We can definitely provide incentives for that, but it's really reaching out and having the will of the local communities and the local landowners to come up with a shared vision that ensures the prosperity of these communities and in livelihood of the people there that are on the land, but also see eye to eye in terms of the I guess the meetup between sustainable practices, regenerative farming, for instance, and carbon credits and biodiversity credits and things like that, that can increase the resilience of croplands and pastures to droughts, but also can improve the have biodiversity benefits and sustain platypuses. So some works in progress, but really that's my big ambition, is to at least start working at one catchment and trying to, it's a big, it's a big ambition, and it's very complex. But I see that as like the way forward. For protecting platypuses and our waterways. So I think that's pretty much it for me. I'm sorry if I didn't leave too much time for questions, but I'm here. So thank you so much, and please reach out if you have any questions or aspirations or whatever. Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Gilad. I'd like to move on to a few questions if you're happy to take those.
Definitely.
Anybody from the floor here? Deb, can you come up, please? Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Gilad. It was really terrific, interesting talk. We have a particular interest, I suppose, in the Hacking River reintroduction, and wondering how, out of the 10 platypus that were introduced, how many of those do you know? How many of those are still surviving? And there were some major rain events that happened earlier in the year, where the levels of the hacking rose many meters above normal, and wondered how well platypus can actually survive that type of event. And a slight extra question is whether the sedimentation of the hacking has impacted on the food resources, and the platypus thriving, or are they kind of just hanging on?
Thank you. So that big significant rain event actually also destroyed some of our tracking capacities. I think we lost about $20,000 worth of equipment during that. It's like, we have these listening stations that are set up to pick up the movements of the platypuses. So we had to and on top of that, another, I would say we lost about a third of our array. Some were stuck under a lot of sediment, and others were completely lost. So our ability, I just came back a couple of weeks ago from the park, and we were realigning everything and setting them up and replacing the batteries. And so we're kind of waiting for December, but I can tell you, so that happened, a few months ago. As of 3 months ago, we were detecting 7 out of the 10 platypuses, but we know we have some gaps in our array. So we might have missed some might be beyond some of them went up the Kangaroo Creek. So, but I can confirm that up to 3 months ago, 7 out of the 10 were still being detected. And there are also the juveniles, which we haven't tagged, so we don't know if they're still around. But I suspect 2 females were breeding at the time, just because we could see their kind of behavior. In terms of your questions, we do autumn and spring macroinvertebrate surveys across the Hacking and Kangaroo. The numbers are, again, I can't give you a total biomass, but I know at the sites that we're continuously surveying, there seem to be an abundance of food. The food web is healthy. The sedimentation is definitely a big issue. Whether it's a legacy issue from the construction of the Helensburgh. There's a lot of there's a lot of coal, which could be a legacy issue from the coal mine. I know Peabody, there were these instances of also the pollution. A lot of the coal ended up in the water. We were actually surveying those particular areas as well. That was also something of a concern for us. It looked like the impact was relatively localized and didn't extend into the hacking at all. And in a sense, like the signal of like the urban runoff was greater than the signal of the coal mine itself in terms of the pollution there. Really, the biggest concern was the reduced pH. That was a big issue there. But that's only in that creek where the colliery is. Yeah, so I'm hoping the platypuses, like, I would love to see them establish and thrive there. Platypuses generally cope with floods, but really the impact of floods is dependent on the integrity of the system. If it's a healthy if it's a healthy system, the resilience is far greater than the degraded system where erosion can happen. Yeah, I think there are like erosion generally is probably is a problem in the hacking. I don't know if like in terms of like what the oddly weir and what sort of impact that has on the ability of all that sediment to get washed down or not. That's something that, to consider. Yeah, so that was.
Would there
I
be
hope
a
that answers.
benefit?
Yeah. Sorry. No, please.
Would there be a benefit in dredging out the area immediately upstream of the weir?
I would think so, that like a bit of like remedial work, which is like in the long run, you don't obviously like do everything. But access along Lady Carrington is like, but it might be like a good strategy in the long run. We've seen that issue in other places where really dredging or removing sediment is the only option to sustain platypuses. Yeah.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thanks, Gilad. Anything coming in on that?
Janine was asking, was the Royal chosen for ease of access to grow your knowledge base, and she's also asking about coal wash in the evidence.
So I didn't get the question. Do you mind repeating that one? Sorry.
If we could repeat it. Janine is asking about the ease of access as to some of the reasons why you chose the hacking to reintroduce platypus, and also coal wash, the impact from rain events on the coal wash.
Yeah. All right. So I'll start with the second question. So we Camp Gully is the creek there where the colliery, where those pollution events, the source of those pollution events occurred. There were, since I've become active, I guess, in terms of the reintroduction of platypuses, there were two instances, significant instances. After both occasions, we went out and did the macroinvertebrate surveys and water quality surveys. On one account, we surveyed specifically Camp Gully, like that area of pollution, in above stream of the colliery and downstream of the colliery. So we had like that system. We had like also a control site, which is another creek just further downstream, which is relatively pristine. And we regularly survey all along the hacking and up the Kangaroo Creek. The impact, in terms of macroinvertebrates and water quality after those pollution events, we were not detecting any impact on macros or water quality, apart from like exactly on the Camp Gully Creek. So when those pollution events happen, usually they occur in conjunction with a lot of obviously rainfall, and so we think like the impact then gets probably diluted quite quickly and is no longer detected in the hacking. Any pollution event is not a good event. There's no justification for pollution, and I'm not trying to justify it whatsoever. And and EPA is the body that is supposed to that does provide the license of operation for the coal mine, and if the coal mine exceeds the conditions of the license, then the EPA should act on it. So that's the proper way. But in terms of the perspective through the lens of platypuses in the food web, we were not detecting any impact along the hacking. why we chose the Royal. I don't think to be honest, I don't think we had a better case for the Royal for a number of reasons. We know platypuses occurred in the Royal. It's quite an iconic species, and it's quite an iconic park. And in terms of like the conceptually, we really wanted to inspire Australians to see a vision where we're reintroducing platypuses back to their former range. For us, it was like an easy choice, and we had the New South Wales government with us, and New South Wales Parks and Wildlife with us on this project, and we have their support. And there was an intention, and has indeed started aerial fox baiting in the first time as a result of this reintroduction. So it was a catalyst to get some action done within the park. And from our assessment, we went through as rigorous an assessment as we could do in terms of mapping out and looking at the habitat of the Royal, and doing bathymetry scan of the whole hacking to see the depth profile, and food web assessments. And for as far as we can tell, they could sustain platypuses. So we went ahead with that. Like, I can't answer for definite what was the reason why platypus disappeared from the park, but I do hope that, like, maybe it could have been a legacy issue. It could be an issue of like a severe drought, or like, obviously the population there is somewhat fragmented as a result of the highway. So there's definitely like a need to manage this population moving forward.
We look forward to hearing further results.
Yeah.
Anything else? Graham.
Thank you. A very interesting talk. What is the impact when you have platypuses in a creek compared to a creek that doesn't have any platypuses in it? Is there much change in the macroinvertebrate population?
Yeah, they're definitely, I guess, considered somewhere on top of the food web there. There was one study where they did an exclusion plot within a system where there were platypuses, and there was definitely there was a significant difference in terms of the composition. So yeah, they and that would relate to the density of platypuses in that area. So it's a complex relationship. So yes, as a predator, they definitely exert a top-down pressure on the food web there. In terms of like the long term, they're like, I guess, how much of an ecosystem engineer they are. Like the bilbies, for instance, when they dig their burrows and they're actually creating crevices where seeds can get lodged, and then moisture can get trapped, and they promote growth. So how much of an engineer they are in a system, I'm sure they have like some sort of influence on the environment in terms of like digging the burrows, churning out leaf litter and sediment. But yeah, beyond those kind of like speculations, I can't tell you further. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Come up.
Hi.
Hey.
Nice talk. It was interesting. I was wondering, what's the process of reintroducing an animal? Like, what sort of approvals do you get? Who do you have to talk to get that? Do you have any species? Well, has there been any reintroductions of platypuses before? Did you use other species as an example? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. No, great. So there've been a few introductions of platypuses in the history. There's an introduced population on Kangaroo Island. It went through a few attempts. The first one was from Tasmania, and I think it was like relatively unsuccessful. And then there was another attempt of platypuses from Victoria, and then there's there's the population there It's still hanging on. It was heavily impacted by the fires and droughts, but it's still there. Genetically, it's not very. It's definitely a bottleneck and needs some genetic rescue. But there were two other examples of introduction of platypuses in Victoria following a millennium drought. Juvenile platypuses were translocated, and there was a follow-up survey which suggested that they were there. But we're not too sure if they endured the 2019 drought. So we rescued some platypuses and brought them back, and they were fine. So we know that platypuses can handle that kind of transition and reintroduction or translocation. So I guess moving forward with that ambition, WWF and collaboration with WWF in Taronga and New South Wales Parks and Wildlife. Yeah, there's like a bit of permits in place. We restricted our translocation to only New South Wales. I was mentioning the morphological variation of platypuses across their range, which is related to thermoregulation. So we were constrained to collecting animals from wild populations. There's no captive breeding. There's no successful captive breeding program or reliable captive breeding program or pool that we can draw on. So really the translocation, the reintroduction was from wild animals. So for that, we had to first identify wild populations in New South Wales, estimate the population size there, and feel comfortable that we can collect just one or two animals from each area without compromising the viability of those source populations. So we went through a number. And then we collected the 10, so we, apply for the permits and did the translocation. So it's all through New South Wales licensing. The reintroduction that we did, they did a stopover at Taronga where we were monitoring them. We implanted them with little trackers, and then after 2 weeks, we introduced the females first and the males first. Yeah, so that's a process. It's quite challenging, like moving on to hopefully the second phase of the reintroduction and adding more animals really to comfortably identify source populations is not a simple task, unfortunately. I wish we could just go and collect as many as we wanted, but we have to be quite picky with that and just make sure that we're collecting from areas where there are a large number of platypuses.
Okay, thank you. Who's got it? Matt? Yep.
Thanks a lot, Gilad, for a really good talk.
Speaker.
I was just wondering, this is not a question about platypus so much as whether you come across water rats or ricali, if they share the same environment, and how is their population going? Do you know?
Yeah, it's ricali usually chew through our nets, so we don't get to estimate their numbers a lot. I do tend to see them sometimes when I'm out there trapping for platypuses. Very, very cute animals. So they share a similar environment in the sense they don't compete for food. The ricali focus on the like the mussels, I guess, or the but yeah, the ricali is like we're definitely seeing some decline, and definitely ricali is something that we're thinking about that we're thinking that we should probably move into while we're doing all of those trapping nights. Then maybe we should also include some capacity to record ricali. So sorry, I can't elaborate more on that.
Gilad, a comment and a question. Just so you know, some of our members actually have been involved in some platypus restoration work. We've been helping plant trees in the Southern Highlands on the Wallandilly River with the Southern Highlands Land Care Group. And we know from their experience, some of us have been paddling on the Wallandilly River, and we've been told that platypus actually are now rehabilitating or coming back to the Wallandilly River. There was, I think, 4 nests there last time we were paddling along the river. This is all because of habitat restoration over a course of 25 years along the banks of the Wallandilly River. So my question is, have you come across other conservation programs where, or can you comment on sedimentation control? Because we definitely heard that the Wallandilly River, in that stretch of the Wallandilly River, is a lot clearer now than it was 25 years ago. So sedimentation control is a question that I have for you is, have you come across other projects where there may be sedimentation coming from mining activity or heavy rainfall or railway lines, etc.? Could you comment on prevention of that, mitigation of that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a great. I wasn't aware of that in the Wallandilly area. So it's unfortunately like the destruction of habitat can happen very quickly, and the restoration can take a lifetime. So yeah, like it doesn't surprise me that it takes 25 years to restore riparian zones and try and like re-deepen the river and minimize erosion. I would love to be able to, yeah, like if you can send me some details, I'd love to be able to visit that area. And my ambition would be like to like in conjunction, like the restoration process, they're so long, so you can't really do like study how platypuses are responding to restoration is something of a like a long-term project in a sense. But it would be great to go back there, go to these areas you're suggesting, and have a look at the river and like maybe study the platypuses in that area and see how they've been recovering. So if you wouldn't mind sending me a bit more details on that, I'd love to hear. In terms of there are, yes, like restoration, I'm encouraged. I think like I hear more and more of community groups getting together and restoring their little patch of river. And I've come across farmers, they're like the 3rd generation or more, and they've seen the degradation of their topsoil, and they're moving to regenerative farming and restoring their soil, and that definitely minimizes erosion. So there's a lot of I guess commonalities in terms of protecting waterways and also minimizing erosion and also improving I guess resilience and livelihood of farmland. Yeah, there are different, I guess, approaches for minimizing. I'm not the expert on minimizing erosion, but yeah, like definitely those kind of practices of restoring riparian vegetation and fencing off and preventing cattle from destroying. You go to the Shoalhaven River, and it's just catastrophic in some areas. The extent of erosion there in those pastures. And the people there blame the wombats and not the cattle. So yeah, I mean, there's like definitely like there's a whole suite of like both riparian and catchment scale strategies to minimize erosion. And I would like to see a coordinated effort, and I think probably land care would be the best framework to really do that and come out with really like I guess guidelines in terms of how you tackle these issues across the continent, or at least New South Wales.
Thank you. I think you've got one more.
Oh, Julian, a similar question talking about, is there any system in place to approach various farming communities to encourage riparian regeneration?
Oh, well,
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Any
Yeah, I
system
did.
in place
I
to
saw
encourage?
that. I mean, yeah, I do it through the kids. So I go and I interact with the kids, and I like tell them and show them and things like that, and then they can go back to their parents and talk to them about platypuses and what they can do. But really, I think that's our only way to really improve our waterways is reaching out to the communities and the landowners and really incentivizing them. We can't expect them to I guess, do everything alone, and so it is a matter of like the community coming together and helping farmlands and restore the rivers. But yeah, through outreach, education, community events, having this like shared vision and this, I guess, a shared sense of stewardship over the land is probably your best bet.
Yes, I fully agree with that. We've heard that message quite a bit over our speakers and our travels and our work around here as well. So that's great. It's been a fantastic talk.
Yeah, thank
Gilad.
you.
Thank you for zooming in for us. And I'd like to ask Deb, who asked a question earlier, to come up and give you a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Gilad, thank you. That was great. So much information to take in, and very encouraging news about the research you're doing and the focus on conservation, because this society is very much focused on conservation, and they do a lot of projects, revegetation, stream watch, and we all have a deep love of the Royal National Park in our area. I've grown up in the Royal National Park. I've worked there as a ranger. I've worked as surveys there. So it is an amazing spot, and it would be wonderful to see a really thriving population of platypus, and hopefully you may see a ricali there one day too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd love to, assist if needed, and we hope that other streams within our region are going to be supporting platypus, and whether or not we could help generate some interest in looking after things like that, investigating the water catchment regions and other nearby streams would be terrific. So thanks so much for giving some time to us to tell us about your research, and we'd love to hear how the whole platypus work is progressing in years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Thank you. All right, have a lovely evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you. If you could just stop sharing.
Yeah.
You've probably done that already. And we'll see you soon. Thanks,
Bye.
Gilad.
Thanks. Bye.